I don't know why he did it. Why does anyone do anything loopy? Maybe there was a full moon that night. Maybe he was wearing itchy underwear. Maybe he'd been playing with himself too much. And that was probably it. Nothing scrambles your marbles more effectively than sustained self-abuse, does it?
You were John Owen's medical officer at the time, weren't you?
Yes.
If medical opinion is at a loss to explain Owen's state of mind the night he went into Unit B119, perhaps his upbringing can at least provide some clues. John Owen was born in Willesden, northwest London, in 1947. Life for the family was hard, as John's sister Jacqueline still remembers.
We were the typical poor family, really. There were 4 of us living in part of a terraced house. We had 2 rooms and a share in 3 of the stairs, I think. There was rationing, of course, so food was short. Dad had all the butter, I remember, because he said he needed it for his teeth. And money was just very, very scarce. We did have a back garden, though, which we were all very proud of, except that Dad would only let us play in it 2 afternoons a week because there was a bomb in it.
There was a bomb in your back garden?
Yes, a German one, you know, one that had been dropped in the war.
How long was it before the authorities came to take it away?
6 or 7 years, I think. Dad tried to keep hold of it for as long as he could, because while it was there, it kept our rates down.
In such conditions, family tensions were inevitable, but they were made worse by John's mother Edna's apparent total lack of maternal instincts.
She wasn't a very good mother at all. One of her problems was that she just couldn't cope with illness. If one of us did fall ill, then she used to pack her bag and go and stay with her sister. I think this was one of the reasons that Dad started to resent John, because as a boy, John was very prone to verrucas.
Eventually, the family tensions proved too much for Edna, who, on a spring day in 1956, walked out of the house and did not return.
I believe she said something to the effect that she needed the time and freedom to find out the kind of person that she really was, which eventually turned out to be a clerical assistant in the pensions department of the DHSS, I think.
That must have hit both you and your brother very hard.
Yes, I suppose it did affect John to some extent, but it was me who suffered most, because both John and Dad turned to me to take Mother's place. I was only 6. I used to have to stand on a chair to make their dinner.
1968 was a highly significant year in John Owen's life. In it, his father died, he joined the RAF, and he married his childhood sweetheart from Willesden, Avril Smith.
Oh yes, definitely a turning point that year was. Looking back, I think I enjoyed Dad's funeral best.
John Owen's marriage to Avril Smith took place on Saturday the 15th of May, 1968. Sadly, it was obvious from the very start that it was not going to be a success.
I think one of the problems was that when we got married, we were still strangers. We didn't really know each other at all.
But by that time you had in fact been going out together for over 11 years.
Oh yes, but there were always other people with us. And it was usually them that I'd spend the evening talking to.
In addition to this, there were serious problems with the physical side of the marriage, I gather.
That's right, yeah. John loathed any form of physical contact, which made sex very difficult and uncomfortable. Eventually, we gave it up altogether. He wasn't getting any pleasure out of it, and I was getting rope burns from the harness.
During this time, deeply unhappy, John Owen wrote long letters to his sister Jacqueline. Her replies, she now concedes, were infrequent, uncaring, and brief.
I didn't pay too much attention to John's letters. I was a bit busy with my own life, and besides, I felt at the time that he was a militaristic pig.
At that time you were a hippie, weren't you?
Yes.
And you had changed your name to Star
Moonburst.
Star
right.
Moonburst. Yes. Which presumably explains why so many of your letters of advice to John consisted only of the 2 words, take drugs.
Well, obviously.
Dr. Marilyn Wensley is an eminent clinical psychologist who has for many years specialized in dealing with the problems caused by poor family relationships. In her opinion, was Jacqueline's advice to her brother at all helpful?
No. Although, to be fair, at the time, that's exactly what we would have suggested as well.
John and Avril's marriage effectively came to an end the night John discovered that Avril was having an affair. The date was September the 19th, 1970, just 2 months before John Owen tried to set off a hydrogen bomb.
John found some letters from a chap called Ray. Silly, really. I should never have kept them. Ray should never have written them. He only lived 2 doors down. And that upset John a lot. I suppose I was a bit of a fool. It was a mistake, that relationship. I mean, I loved Ray very much at the time, but I'd never have gone to bed with him if I'd known it was going to endanger Suffolk.
Owen's growing sense of isolation can only have been enhanced by the antipathy felt by many of the villagers towards the serving RAF men in their midst.
Oh, there's a lot of bad feeling amongst the locals towards the RAF. If a local girl gets pregnant going with an RAF bloke never marries her. That's happened to my sister 5 times. Well, people around here remember things like that.
People say they was bad during the war too, don't they?
Yes.
Forever flying their Spitfires and everything, apparently. Gave poor old Stan Jacobs in the village one heck of a fright on VE Day. In the end, he refused to go up any more ladders. They had to string most of Bunting on the ground.
But the hostility that John Irwin faced from the local villagers was nothing compared with that he encountered on the base from Flight Sergeant Houghton.
When Houghton was at the base, there were all sorts of instances of bullying and initiation ceremonies. The evidence would pop up all over the place.
If you knew that Flight Sergeant Houghton was behind these activities, surely some of the officers on the base must have known.
Oh, some of them did, yeah. But if anything, they were more frightened of him than the rest of the men.
Why?
Houghton was in charge of packing the parachutes.
One man who had to deal with the results of some of Flight Sergeant Houghton's handiwork was the medical officer, Wing Commander Tommy Kimberley. Did he never suspect what was going on?
The usual story was they'd fallen down some stairs or walked into a door. I took them at their word.
In 1 month, you treated 25 severe cases of falling down stairs and walking into doors, didn't you?
There were a lot of stairs and doors at RF Brackenham. It was that sort of place. I often did it myself late at night. Well, not that just the occasional one to be sociable, you know.
You didn't believe then that Flight Sergeant Houghton had inflicted any of these injuries?
I understand that Flight Sergeant Houghton was responsible for organizing a number of initiative exercises. Some of these inevitably had their casualties.
You yourself were often called to help release men who'd got both feet jammed down a toilet after Houghton had forced them to stand in it and sing songs from South Pacific while he beat their backsides with a long plank of wood.
Yes.
What sort of test of initiative was that?
I believe the idea was to see that if, when the men realized Houghton was looking for them, carrying a long plank of wood and humming Some Enchanted Evening, they'd have sufficient initiative to leg it. Fortunately, of course, most of them did. They tended to be the same 4 people I had to pull out of the toilets every night.
What sort of states were they in when you got to them? Were they upset?
Oh, yes, of course, and quite understandably so. Fail a simple test like that, you've got very little chance of becoming an officer.
Since